This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle in for Sean, who is on vacation and will be back on Tuesday. Polls in the Montana special election closed at the top of the hour, and we are now awaiting results in that race. Also, tonight, another new and explosive report from Circa about your privacy rights. Sarah Carter and John Solomon just filed a new story with the headline, quote, declassified memos show FBI illegally shared spy data on Americans with private parties. Sarah Carter and John Solomon join us now with all the details. Sarah, good evening. I'll begin with you. If you can explain to the viewers how this process actually works with the FBI illegally sharing the information about Americans with third parties.
Yes, well, Kimberly, what we discovered through these documents, which were recently declassified by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, was stunning. What they said was that the FBI was illegally sharing warrantless spy data. That means they did not have a warrant and they were sharing it with third parties. And in one case, they shared it with a party. They didn't explain who that party was, but it was a forbidden party, a party that was not allowed to have this type of raw intelligence. Another thing that they stated was that not only did they do that, but they were intercepting communications, attorney-client privileged communications without oversight. Wow. So very little oversight. This didn't happen once or twice. This was hundreds of times. And another thing that they mentioned was that there was very little oversight overall in what the FBI was accessing through the NSA database. And I think this is very concerning because this is the first time that we've actually heard that the FBI, not just the NSA, which John and I broke just several days ago, right. That the FBI itself was also dabbing into the database and moving raw intelligence around that actually affected our Fourth Amendment rights and our privacy rights as Americans.
It's really unbelievable. This is an explosive story. It's really a bombshell in terms of the flagrant violation of people's privacy rights. I mean, John, were you shocked really at just sort of the extent of this and the far reach?
I'd like to say I was, but I'm not. And the more that we dig into the spying that went on in the Obama administration and these expansion of powers, the more we see that the Fourth Amendment has been abused or certainly put at risk. And I think one of the things that you ask a lot of times, we hear a lot of talk in Washington about all these leaks. Where do they come from? Well, the more you pass this stuff down, it goes from the NSA to the FBI, then the FBI to private citizens. That's how you're going to get a trail of leaks. And I think that if they want to stop this, they've got to tighten it up.
What do they do, Sarah, though, to tighten it up? John brings up a great point because everybody at home's frustrated. Like, really? They get this in check. What is going on that people literally don't feel that there's going to be any repercussion, any kind of criminal or civil repercussion for what they're doing, violating the laws here and violating the privacy rights of American citizens?
Well, there's a couple of things that they can do, Kimberly. We know right now that they're going to launch a massive investigation into the leaks. It's going to be very interesting to see where these leaks came from. I believe that some of these leaks came from very high up because some of the information, for example, when you're dealing with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, that would have been a very small number of people that would have had access to those tech cuts. Now, if they talked about it and put it in emails, then that leak expansion could be a little bit wider, a little bit bigger, but still, according to my sources, it's very narrow. Another thing that I believe can be done is that Congress right now is planning on investigating this. Remember, Section 702 is coming up for review. This FISA Section 702, which allows the NSA to basically collect information on non-U.S. citizens overseas, and those incidental intercepts are happening where they're collecting Americans' information as well, is coming for review at the end of the year. Darrell Issa, Trent Franks, others who've spoken to us say that they're going to look at this law. They're going to, and some of them aren't even going to vote for it unless it's revised.
Well, it has to be. I mean, this is a real big problem, especially when you look back at the time frame and the chronology, John, in terms of how far back this goes and the pervasiveness of it.
It does. 2011, Barack Obama changed the rules, and ever since that time, we saw a tripling of the sort of spying on Americans going on, and now we see these leaks and violations. And I think an unusual coalition is going to come together. You're going to see the ACLU and conservatives agreeing on something for the first time and trying to fix fix this when this bill comes up for renewal this fall.
Okay, how quick do you think the turnaround on this in terms of being able to do something to stop the leaks?
Well, they have to put someone, they have to arrest someone, right? They have to find someone and make an example. That's the fastest way to stop a leaking problem. But you just look, every day there are 10, 20 leaks. Even the British are mad at us.
Well, the president's certainly vowing to do something about this, and I think he's going to get to the bottom of it. Sarah and John, thank you so much. Keep up with the great work at Circa. Coming up, we are awaiting the results from the Montana special election. Polls closed in the state just about 30 minutes ago. But first,
all people who cherish life must unite in finding, exposing, and removing these killers and extremists.
and that was President Trump earlier today speaking in front of NATO members about the need to eradicate extremism. Welcome back to Hannity, and this is a Fox News alert. We are awaiting the results from the Montana special election, where the polls closed just over 30 minutes ago. But first, President Trump was at the new NATO headquarters today in Brussels, where he once again called for terrorists to be wiped out. Watch this.
All people who cherish life must unite in finding, exposing, and removing these killers and extremists. And yes, losers. They are losers. Wherever they exist in our societies, we must drive them out and never, ever let them back in.
Joining me now with reaction is former spokesman for the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Rick Grenell, and Fox News contributor Mercedes Schlapp. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Very busy news night. So today, President Trump spoke about the need to drive out the extremists. Do you think, Rick, that members of NATO are doing enough to combat radical Islamic terror?
Well, clearly what NATO needs to do is have a new mission, and that new mission needs to include dealing with international terrorism. We have a capabilities gap at NATO right now, where some countries are coming under the NATO umbrella and they're not really able to give militarily. So they're coming under the umbrella to get the protection. And what we need to do is work on the capabilities gap so that every country is pulling their weight, not just paying the bills, which is extremely important and should be a priority as well, but the capabilities gap is a real problem at NATO, and that's got to be solved as well.
How do you fix that, though? Because you're dead on about this. There's really a capabilities problem, but what are the steps to even try to rectify that, Rick?
Well, look, I'm going to throw something out here that's a little bit crazy about NATO, but if we're going to talk about terrorism and we're going to talk about teaching other countries how to deal with terrorists, and we have a capabilities gap at NATO, why not make Israel part of NATO? They are one of the countries that every country could learn from in terms of how do you deal with terrorists. And I think NATO's got to be thinking differently about these issues. If you're going to make NATO, of course, blocking Russia, that's a standard, that's a 100% number one priority. But we also have to update its mission, and we have to think differently about NATO. One of the other things, too, Kimberly, is that we should not have countries calculating their pensions towards defense spending. That's a social program. They're important, but it's not. It shouldn't calculate towards your 2% of defense spending when you talk about military pensions.
Such a great point. Now, Mercedes, what do you think? Because that's an interesting, outside the box in terms of the thinking there to say, okay, let's bring in Israel.
But we don't even have to think outside the box. There's a bigger issue here, which Chancellor Merkel spoke about today with her little friend, President Obama, where they talked about open borders. This is an issue that obviously in many of these countries in Europe, that they're not willing to accept the reality that if they hone in on an agenda where it is about open borders and not controlling the migrants who are coming in and the refugees who are coming in, not knowing who is coming into their country, that is a fundamental problem. NATO can't solve the problem. The United States can't solve that problem. And this is why if they can't track these individuals, for example, in the case of the Manchester bomber who was traveling to Libya, who was going to Syria, where there are these red flags everywhere, but they viewed him as sort of a minor figure and not an immediate threat, I think that there's a very clear reality right now that if the European leaders do not take this seriously in terms of understanding who is coming in and out of their country. That, I think, is a bigger issue, Kimberly.
Yeah, what about that, Rick, in terms of their own individual and personal responsibility as countries that need to be part of the solution here and have some skin in the game to say, we're going to do everything we can. We take this problem seriously. We're going to pay our dues, and we're actually going to do something about this.
Look, every single country enforces its own immigration laws. That's just a fact. Sometimes the United States is the only country that gets criticized for trying to enforce its immigration law. But if you look at the real details here, we're the most generous when it comes to allowing people to come here as permanent residents. More than 1 million people every single year become permanent residents in the United States. We also allow more than 4 million people to come here as students for a longer term stay, and 42 million people have visitors visas. And so when you look at the numbers, the United States is by far the most generous when it comes to allowing people into our country. We just need to enforce our immigration laws and have extreme vetting so that we know who's coming in. It's not a crazy idea.
No, it's not. Mercedes, when you look at this and just the, kind of the juxtaposition, especially with this timing, right now what's going on, President Trump's calling for that extreme vetting that Rick has just mentioned right here. America wants to secure its borders.
Clearly what they're doing is, rather than focusing in on what the words are within the law, they've decided to go back to President Trump's campaign statements and use that as part of their argument to uphold the injunction on the travel ban. But here's the reality that we have, which is the fact that you saw former FBI Director James Comey, former Obama administration officials basically very concerned about the fact that you can't vet individuals coming into the United States from Syria. There is not U.S. soldiers on the ground that basically are collecting the information of the local population. So it makes it incredibly difficult to ensure that people who are, as we know, ISIS says that they want to infiltrate through the refugee program. It makes it very difficult, I think, for the United States to handle these situations when you're talking about countries of concern, which is what President Obama pushed through in terms of these 7 or 6 countries that President Obama used in his in his travel ban.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit here because we are actually going to extend into the next hour because we're awaiting results in the Montana special election, and the Associated Press is reporting it is a tight race indeed. And after reports of last night's altercation between Gianforte and a reporter, how do we think that might impact the results? So I want to just get your take on this, Rick, and what are you expecting?
Well, look, I think that if everybody was voting after they heard this news, we'd have a different result. But I hear 2/3 of the voters had already voted in early voting. It's one of the issues why, I've been a part of a lot of campaigns, and it's one of the issues why early voting it obviously has its advantages, but in certain situations it has its disadvantages. When new information comes out, when some sort of scandal erupts, if you voted too early, then you don't have the benefit of this knowledge. So I think this race would be very different if we had everybody voting at the same time after the fact on election day. I mean, clearly Alicia Acuña's first-hand account to me made the difference. She was there, she saw what happened, and I just think that it's unacceptable.
About this issue, Mercedes, obviously this is an important seat to the Republicans, but you can't discount what's happened here. And as Rick, points out, there was eyewitness, percipient witnesses right there to say exactly what happened. And you heard the report from our very own Alicia Acuña, one of our camera people and also a producer that was there that saw what transpired. There was also some issue as to whether or not there was an inconsistent statement, put out by Gianforte's press team, on this, Mercedes.
I do believe that if Gianforte would have come out with an apology early on, I think it could have definitely been to his benefit. I think for him to wait and not state an apology but kind of push back on the argument was weak. It didn't help him. Now, at the end, I do believe this is, this is a safe Republican seat, although I believe right now it's a very tight race based on the shock value on the last, 24 hours of what we've seen. I do believe Gianforte will win, but I do believe that it's been unfortunate circumstances. And really, I think it's a lesson to candidates all out there, even when the temperature is high in a political campaign and there's tension, the last thing you need to do is body slam a reporter. There's enough body slamming that's going on in Congress. Use your energy for fighting the Democrats in Congress, not going after a reporter.
Yeah, I mean, Rick, this is really unbelievable. Talk about like a fumble at, first and goal here. I mean, really a big problem. And by the way, here's what bothers me the most about it is that people are actually trying to tie this to President Trump and say that this is his fault, that he created this narrative, that he has encouraged this kind of language, behavior, assaultive conduct against members of the press. That to me is just like, wow, astonishing.
I think it's astonishing, too. And, the seat is going to be a problem for Republicans if Gianforte wins. It's going to be a problem for Speaker Paul Ryan. I think that it would be best if the NRCC and others came out and just simply said, this is unacceptable. Violence is never okay. Distance themselves from this before before people started voting. One of the best things that could happen for the Republicans would be for him to lose and then they not have this around their neck as he comes into Congress.
I disagree with you. You know how it is with these members of Congress. They bundle up. No one will remember who Gianforte is. Important for the Republicans to win this seat. And I think, it was an unfortunate incident. It should have never happened. I wish he would have apologized early on, but we need the Republicans in Congress in order to stop the Democrats. That's clearly the case in point here.
I think we need. Well, I certainly want the Republicans to win. That's not my point. But I think it would be different if he had some sort of a financial scandal, or if he was, caught doing something where he had to come out and admit an error.
Yeah, but he's got a criminal case now pending. That's the problem. And the only thing that people might forget about,
violence.
it's physical violence. It's assaultive conduct. And by the way, what's the backstory on this? He says, you guys are always doing this. What, asking questions about the budget? This is a little bit like, especially because you can hear the tape. Maybe the one thing that's going to save him is there isn't an actual video of him going honey badger. I don't know. I mean, because if there was a video, we'd be seeing it every day.
It would be like the
Alicia's a pretty credible reporter.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Alicia's a pretty credible reporter, and she said, hands around the neck.
Away. Exactly, and the glasses are broken. All right, unacceptable conduct, no doubt. Results coming in. I will ask you guys to stand by because we're going all the way. Coming up, we are awaiting results from the Montana special election. We will be live until midnight covering the race. Anthony Scaramucci will join us later tonight. Plus, a Gold Star mom who supported President Trump during the election is out with a brand new book just in time for Memorial Day. That and much more as Hannity continues.
Trump's first G7 summit. Inside his crucial meetings with world leaders, plus a powerful speech to our troops abroad.
This is a Fox News alert, and we are awaiting results from the Montana special election. We will be live tonight until midnight covering the results. But first, my next guest is a Gold Star mom who supported President Trump during the election. She now has a brand new book out just in time for Memorial Day called World Changer, a mother's story, the unbreakable spirit of U.S. Navy SEAL Erin Carson Vaughn. Karen Vaughn, my friend, joins me now tonight to tell us more about this important book and her son, his legacy. Erin.
Yeah.
Wonderful for you to be here tonight with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've known each other now, what, for over 5.5
years now.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So you've been working on this book. And tell us first a little bit about, and I know about him, but to share with the viewers about your son.
Aaron was just a remarkable human being. By the time he was 8 years old, he knew exactly what he was created to be. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL, and he overcame unimaginable odds to achieve that dream, Kimberly, and unfortunately lost his life in the midst of that dream at the pinnacle of his career, at the pinnacle of his life. 30 years old, a beautiful wife at home, and 2 small babies, a 2-year-old son and a daughter that was only 9 weeks old.
And the tragedy that happened where he lost his life was August 6, 2011. Helicopter carrying 30 Americans who perished on a mission. This really changed your life. It put you on a new path that I witnessed you going.
It did. It did. You know what it did is it forced me out of my comfort zone and into a world where what I like to say is Aaron fought for this country kinetically, And I decided after his death that it was my obligation to fight for this country culturally. So that's what I started doing. I started fighting for VA reform. I primarily started fighting for reform in rules of engagement for our warfighters. But then the love of my life finally came to culmination when I got to start writing this book, because I captured so many stories about Aaron and so many memories. And when I put it all together, I realized I had written something that could actually help parents across this country learn how to raise kids who are...
About this is that you said you wanted to give parents advice on how to raise children who would leave a mark on the world.
Right. Not just exist, but exist for a purpose, you know, really live. Kids who have the courage to go out and do everything they were created to be, you know, and there's a pattern in those children. You know, you see it throughout their life. And there's steps we can take as parents to make that happen, and that's what I want to do with World Changer. 18 chapters of study guide in the back of this book.
And very worthwhile. We encourage people to get, especially for Memorial Day weekend. So happy to have you here, my friend.
Thank
God
you.
bless you and your commitment to the veterans and to your beautiful son.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right.
Kimberly.
And coming up, don't go anywhere, please. We are live for the next hour covering the Montana special election. Alicia Acuna is standing by at Gianforte's headquarters. Stay with us. It's going to be a fun night. This is a Fox News Alert. Welcome to Hannity. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle, filling in for Sean, who is out for the Memorial Day holiday. We are live tonight until midnight and are awaiting the results from the Montana special election. The polls are closed and early results show it is a tight race indeed. Last night, the GOP candidate Greg Gianforte reportedly body slammed a Guardian reporter. Wow, listen to this.
You were waiting to make your decision about health care until you saw the bill and it just came out. And what
Yeah, and we'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, but there's not going to be time. I'm just curious if you have
Okay,
the
speak
right
with
now.
Shane, please.
But you don't.
Sick and tired of you guys. The last time that came in here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here. Jesus. Get the hell out of here. The last guy did the same thing. You were the Guardian?
Yes, and you just broke my glasses.
The last guy did the same damn thing.
You just body slammed me and broke my glasses.
All right, and our very own Alicia Acuna and her crew witnessed the incident that you just heard on that tape. She joins us now with the very latest. You really heard like an altercation, and then he said the last guy came in here and did the same thing. What was he referring to?
From what we understand, Greg Gianforte was referring to another reporter from The Guardian. However, I don't have details on what he was referring to specifically, if there was some other sort of disagreement between Mr. Gianforte and another reporter from The Guardian. From listening to interviews that I've heard Ben Jacobs give from The Guardian, that was the person you heard there who has glasses broken and all of that. He has said that he didn't feel that he had a personal issue with Mr. Gianforte, that he had covered him, he had been to some of the campaign events, things like that, but really said he was just as surprised as we were. I was standing two, maybe 3 feet from the two men when this happened. Kimberly?
Did anything happen after, Alicia, where they tried to talk to you to see what statement you would give, or they tried to downplay it or anything like that?
No one downplayed it. Once Ben Jacobs left, Mr. Gianforte looked at us, the three of us standing there, and I mean our photographer and the field producer who was there, and apologized. He apologized multiple times. And then his press guy, Shane Scanlon, he left and then came back and told us that he didn't see the whole thing. He came in kind of toward the end after everything had happened and he heard the noise, and he asked us what it was that we saw. So it could be a genuine question, him just asking, you know, what did you see? It could have been to see what it was that we were going to be reporting as well. I really can't say. I just know that we did have that exchange. Then we were told that the sheriff's department had arrived and we needed to talk to the sergeant.
But then they also released a statement that really did not match up with your eyewitness, you know, statement and observations by yourself, the cameraman, and also the producer.
Right. No, it didn't match, and we noticed that immediately. And when that statement was released, Keith Raley, the photographer, Faith Mandan, the field producer, and I were sitting in a witness interview room at the Sheriff's Department, at the Justice Center, when that crossed. And we discussed how different it was from what we had just seen, because in that statement, and I don't have it in front of me right this minute, but essentially the Gianforte campaign was saying that Ben Jacobs was much more aggressive in his approach when he was asking questions, that he was waving his recorder in Gianforte's face, and that Gianforte tried to grab the recorder, and then that's when he says Ben Jacobs tried to grab it, and then there was this exchange, and then it went from there. I can tell you from standing right there, that's not what I saw. That is not what Keith Raley, the photographer, saw. That is not what Faith Mangan, the field producer, saw. These are people who have worked for the Fox News channel and covered news for decades. And none of us saw what was sent to the media in that statement. And we haven't heard from him since. Gianforte was scheduled to do a live interview today on the Fox News channel. He canceled that and put out a statement saying that they were canceling all national interviews. And from what I understand, that's exactly what happened, because there were other media outlets that were reporting that he also canceled with them. We're waiting to see if he's going to be here at the headquarters, they're calling it, for tonight at the Hilton Garden Inn in Bozeman. This is the watch party where he was scheduled to speak. And we haven't been able to confirm independently that he in fact will be here.
All right, where do
Kimberly?
we stand in terms of the election results, coming in? Obviously there was early voting and those votes stand, but the results and returns are coming in now at this hour as well.
Right, and I've got, actually, they have the Associated Press up next to me, so I can tell you it's, let's see, they have 25% of the precincts reporting. That's 169 out of 681, and right now they're within 2 points. Right now, Greg Gianforte is ahead 48% to Democrat Rob Quist, who is at 46%. However, right before I came on with you, I was talking to the Director of Elections for the Secretary of State's office for Montana, and he explained to me, we are very, very early in the process here, and he is hoping to have some sort of finality to this by midnight Mountain Time tonight, if not sooner. So we have a long way to go. However, I must tell you that going into the event that happened yesterday, the general consensus was, and a lot of analysts were saying, that they expected Gianforte to win, that he was going to hold on to that Republican seat. It's interesting that it's so close, but again, it's early.
And to remind our viewers,
Kimberly.
this was the seat held by Ryan Zinke, who then received an appointment with the Trump administration. Obviously a key seat for the Republicans. They were hoping to retake this. It's unclear at this hour, Alicia, in terms of the tightness of the race, whether or not those early voting returns are going to be enough to catapult Gianforte into the seat, but nevertheless he is still facing criminal charges from this the allegations and assaultive conduct that you personally witnessed that transpired last night. We're going to be checking back with you, Alicia, later in the hour. I want to thank you for your reporting tonight. And joining us now with reaction is former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer. So really just developing news tonight in terms of those returns coming in. An unfortunate situation when you see things like this, and we spoke earlier in the previous hour, you would hope that people would have all of the facts, the information, but there is late-breaking things that can always happen in any election. We saw that as well in the presidential election in terms of the news cycle, that can impact the voters' decisions and how they may cast their vote. But with 2/3 having previously cast the vote that they are not able to change at this point, what do you think in terms of the ramifications?
Well, I live in New York State where there is no early voting. And I think, frankly, you're better off if there's no early voting. I know Democrats enjoy it. They like it. They think it's an issue. If you don't have it, you're somehow discriminating.
Right.
I think you're actually giving the voters the full window in which to make their measurements. So I like the New York system. Montana has, every state's free to make its own rules. But let me make two broader points here.
Sure.
Number one, Kimberly, I have sat through extraordinarily tense times and pressure-filled times surrounded by the press corps. Now, I don't care how much press or stress you're under, you don't do what Greg Gianforte did.
Right.
It's wrong, and you just cannot get physical with reporters. You have to have the patience to put up with reporters, and they are aggressive. That's their job. Two, though, in terms of will it affect the election, I get a strong feeling this is a lot like when Donald Trump made those remarks about John McCain being a prisoner of war and he doesn't like his people being captured. You're not a hero. And everybody blew their head up. They just thought, how can he say this? His polling numbers are going to drop. He can't go anywhere. And the public just didn't see it that way. I just have a gut feeling that that's going to be the same thing here in Montana. The journalists are reacting to this, as they should, because they should defend their brethren.
Sure.
But I don't think the public is going to share that sentiment.
Do you think that's also due in part to the fact that there has been such dissatisfaction? Look at the poll numbers in terms of that people believe there's a serious liberal bias out there, that there is problems, with the mainstream media on a specific ideological narrative, very against the Trump administration, very against the GOP and Republicans. And when you see this type of situation emerge where he's expressing this frustration, at this reporter, this is what you guys always do. There isn't a video of it, although there is that audio that maybe people are saying, wow, somebody stood up, enough is enough. Again, not to condone this because this is way out of line, but
That's right.
maybe that can have that sort of impact where it really doesn't penetrate in for someone to sit there and make a value change choice to say, I'm not going to vote for somebody who did this.
I think that's exactly right. And you cannot and should not ever do what Greg Gianforte did.
No, you
it's
should
wrong.
not.
Does it disqualify you in the eyes of voters to hold a congressional seat? And that's what we're going to find out here. But this is also where I do think the reality is, and this is the problem when reporters are not held in high regard by our countrymen.
Right.
And reporters have created a situation where so many people don't trust them, don't like them, that when something like this happens, there can be a sense of, well, it was just a reporter. And I hate that as somebody who actually enjoys working with reporters. But if he does win tonight and there really is no change in voter behavior, I do think it is akin to what Trump said about McCain. And voters just have this sense of, it was wrong, he shouldn't have done it, but it's not disqualifying.
Sure. Now, how should the Republicans handle this? If he is able to overcome this, Gianforte, and actually win this election, outright, what kind of statements should the GOP make? And also the President of the United States. What do you do with this?
Well, first and foremost, Greg Gianforte needs to handle this. The idea that he might not even show up at his own headquarters to give a speech it's ludicrous. He's the candidate. He has an obligation to show up, and he needs to take it head on. He needs to explain that it was a moment of high stress. He made a mistake. He never should have done it. He should apologize personally to the reporter. He should apologize to the media outlet, The Guardian, and he should apologize to his constituents if he's elected, and if he loses, apologize to the people of Montana. Republicans in Washington, I think, should do something similar. They should condemn him. They should say what you did was wrong. You should never do that. But they have no right in Washington to sit in superior judgment to the voters of Montana. If the voters of Montana decide to send him, he's sent. If they decide not to send him, he's not sent. And people in Washington need to respect that.
Yeah, don't you think, you make such a good point about getting out in front of this and owning it and saying, you know what, I made a horrible mistake and I am ashamed of my behavior. It was unacceptable. I let myself down, my family, the voters in Montana that deserve so much better. I want to pledge to you that I am going to do something about this, that I'm deeply sorry. Maybe he gets anger management counseling. I don't know, but it seems like he needs a crisis communication team stat.
No, that's the last thing he needs. He needs just to be himself and be sincere.
Well, be sincere, but maybe someone has to teach him and tell him, show him the ropes.
Well, then it's not sincere, is it? That's the thing. The public can read you and see you. And if they think it's just a BS apology because you're supposed to say one, they'll never accept it. It's not credible. If he actually is genuinely remorseful, he doesn't need anybody to help him to be remorseful. And it should start with a phone call to the reporter before he even does anything publicly.
Well, I don't know. Like really good, thoughtful, considerate, non-assaultive people probably, they would be sincere. They wouldn't engage in this, to begin with. I don't know. We're going to have to see what happens. But definitely, hopefully, we'll be getting some results within this hour. Ari Fleischer, always a gentleman and a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Thanks, Kimberly.
All right, coming up, early results show the Montana special election is a tight race. We're going to have updates throughout the hour. And This is a Fox News Alert. Welcome back to Hannity. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle, filling in for Sean, who is on vacation. Early results from the Montana special election show it is a tight race, and we're going to have updates. As soon as we get them, we're going to bring them to you. But first, the Trump administration is about to get ready to go on offense. A new report in Axios reads, quote, West Wing officials are prepping for a years-long war with investigators and the bureaucracy with plans to beef up legal, surrogate communications, and rapid response teams as part of a new normal for President Trump besieged. The Trump ally told the outlet they're getting, quote, street fighters ready to go. Joining us now with reaction, the founder of Skybridge Capital, Anthony Scaramucci. Anthony, thanks for being with us here tonight. So exactly, street fighters, it sounds like a video game.
But not Montana congressmen that hit people.
No, not him.
Try not to do that.
They'll not be calling on
bad behavior.
So what do you make of this report in Axios? They've been able to break a couple of big news stories, but there has been a lot of discussion up to this point about the administration needing some people in there with excellent communication skills, crisis communication management, rapid response, and especially now in light of these allegations and a lot of the discussion about Russia and collusions and leaks.
Well, Kimberly, I certainly think it's the right thing to do. And if you even go back 25 years ago, there was a 24-hour war room that the Clintons put together during their campaign.
That's right.
I think that the president is trying to execute his agenda. I think it's been overwhelming in subjectivity. And so the president is probably now coming up, and his team is coming up with a different strategy. It's almost like they need to have a counter-narrative offensive coming out of the White House to come right over the top of the American people. The president's using Twitter. I think some people think that's effective. Some people may not think it's effective. I thought it was very effective during the campaign.
Certainly.
Still seems to be very effective to me in terms of reaching the base. But I think he has to counteract what's going on in the mainstream media narrative. And this could be a very good idea. It'll be interesting to see who he puts in those positions.
Yeah, now, who would you suggest in terms of, in terms of putting in people, that you trust, loyal to the president, and also, understand them, that he that have been successful in the past at working with the media to try to counteract, some of these stories, because he's getting hit with a disproportionate number of, negative stories and a tremendous amount of leaks, much more so than we saw even with, the Obama administration or the Bush administration.
Well, he can go to anybody. He can go right down the slate from the Corey Lewandowski's, Dave Bossi's, Brian Lanza's, the Jason Millers.
Corey Lewandowski.
He may go to those guys. He may go to a whole other new group of people. I think what you find about the president is if he calls, people are going to be responsive to him. He's the president. He has a whole team of people that help bring him into the White House that I know he has an enormous amount of respect for and he trusts. They're extremely loyal to him. And so I think some combination of those men and women, I think, are there and ready to serve him. But I think the most unique thing about what's going on right now is that he is a disruptive change agent, Kimberly. And that swamp has a very intense immunological system. They don't want him in there, and they're trying to reject him in every way that they can. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. I predict that the president will prevail in this.
Okay, so you think that this is something that he can...
Joe Biden there, John Brennan, a collection of different people, Valerie Jarrett, went around the table, and universally, whether they were Republicans or Democrats at the table, every person more or less said that they thought the president could correct this. He's got the big opportunity to control the narrative. One great thing about the presidency, it sets the news cycle every day. And he's a great communicator. And people genuinely like the president. So it's just one short year ago, I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico with him. 8,000 people in the Civic Center, 9,000 people waiting outside. He's going to Iowa, I think, in the next 5 or 10 days. There'll be thousands of people there to greet him. He's a very well-liked guy. And I think he just has to get a hold of what he wants to say on a daily basis, and he'll start pushing that back pretty aggressively.
And he's coming then, he's coming back, I guess, this weekend, but on, the heels of a very successful trip in terms of his meetings that he's had with world leaders. You've talked about the president's interpersonal skills. We've seen him to great measure of success in terms of sitting down with them one-on-one, like we saw with the president of China, having those relationships and being able to make it work.
Yeah, I think he is a wonderful representative of the American people, but just think of what he did. He got to the Middle East. He's letting people know that the axis is going to shift back to the Sunnis and to the Israelis. Very powerful for us in terms of the balance of power there. Then he's in Rome talking to who is arguably one of the most powerful people in the world that doesn't have an army, Kimberly. Just remember what John Paul II did with Ronald Reagan. Hopefully that relationship can start to develop quite well. And then he's at NATO. And he recognizes that while there are challenges to NATO, there's a way to re-engineer NATO and make it for the modern era, not dealing with the Cold War situation that was its original premise, but dealing with what we have to do now, which is counteract terrorism and evil. And I think that was a very effective situation for him.
What about the consistency of the message, with the president telling people they have to pay their fair share to other member nations because they enjoy the benefit of the relationship with the United States and our help, financially, militarily. Some people thought, well, this was a very, strong message that he gave. What do you think?
I think history will reflect very well on him for this. Some presidential historian 25 years from now will say, there you go, you had an American businessman in place. There was a deal at the table. Some of the Western European politicians walked away from the deal, but the President of the United States brought them back to the table. My guess is that you'll start to see a rise in defense spending on the GDP side as a percentage basis in those Western European nations that are not paying their fair share.
Okay.
So you got to give him credit for that, too.
Oh, absolutely. And he was very well received, if you notice, over in Israel, Saudi Arabia. So a very successful trip for him. But let's just talk about the family for a moment, if we could. Obviously, some breaking news reports tonight about Jared Kushner, some allegations in terms of FBI perhaps, looking at him with respect to the Russia story. What do you make of this?
I think it's a whole lot of nothing, and I think that Jared has been very willing to go before the Congress and talk about it. There's different qualifications. People say they're a person of interest. That's very, very different from him being a potential suspect in the case.
Or a target.
I will also say this, the president trusts Jared. I know Jared very well. He's an extremely intelligent guy, and I think he's a very ethical person, and so my money's on Jared that he handled this thing very well. Remember, in the transition, what some of the things that these guys need to do, they need to make an outreach to people from around the world, whether they're from Russia, China, other parts of the world. And so I don't think he did anything wrong. I wasn't in those meetings, but my guess is that he'll come out of this just fine. And he did express a willingness several months ago to go before the Congress and testify. So my money's on him.
So he's cooperating, not acting like he has anything to hide.
And I don't think he has anything to hide. I don't think the president has anything to hide. But what is happening in Washington, though, to me is disappointing because it's a constant investigation, conspiracy, industrial complex. And so we're going to run these investigations on the president for the next 8 years. And I think it's very smart of him to put a crisis management team together, bring lawyers in like Kazowicz that he trusts to help him to rebut these arguments. And so I think things are going to get a lot better pretty quickly.
It sounds like that. So it sounds like some important and necessary changes are going to be made so the president can actually focus on his policies and his agenda and his platform that he promised the working men and
I also
women.
think he enjoys being president. I think he enjoyed some of those the fanfare of those trips, meeting those people, and representing the American people who I know he loves.
All right, fantastic. Anthony Scaramucci, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks.
And coming up, it's a tight race in the Montana special election. We are following the results closely. Plus, President Trump tells NATO members it is time for them to pay their fair share. This is a Fox News alert, and it is a tight race in the Montana special election. We are following the results closely. And so far, according to the Associated Press, 35% of the precincts are now reporting in. And here now with the reaction are Fox News contributors Charlie Hurt and Jessica Tarlov. So this one, it's a tight race indeed, Jessica. We've got 35% in. So far, Gianforte is ahead. What do you make of it?
Well, he should be ahead based on the early vote percentages and just what happened in 2016. Montana won for Donald Trump by 21 points. And as we talked about in the previous hour, 65% of early votes came in and favored him greatly. What is interesting, though, is now they're predicting a single-digit win for him as opposed to a double-digit win, which would be a good night for Democrats. That's something that they would certainly go out there and fundraise about. They'd talk about the resistance, how it's working, how it's beating down Republican strength. And that would be the silver lining of all of this.
Yeah, and Charlie, I wonder what that would be also attributed to in terms of, well, did people flip if it's a single digit, win, did people flip and then vote for the Democrat that would have been, strong, likely Republican voters? Or was there some attrition where then people did not show up that hadn't early voted? I'm curious about that.
Well, I'll be
Get out your
honest,
crystal
Kimberly.
ball.
I'm not sure how you how Democrats will be able to spin this as a positive thing if they lose, because you have it's not even a midterm. It's like the midterm of a midterm sort of election, and you have the left is very vocal right now. They're very energized. They hate Donald Trump. The resistance movement is very real. They're raising money, and if they can't win, and I get it, obviously Montana is a pretty Republican state,
right,
but it's not totally hostile to Democrats.
Right.
Democrats can win there, and if they can't win in this environment when there's so much vitriol towards Donald Trump, and Republicans right now, they're facing serious problems in these town hall meetings about the Trump care or Ryan care or whatever you want to call it. If they can't make a mark, an actual electoral win in this environment, even in Montana, I think that spells real trouble for this resistance movement translating into anything that means anything at the polls going forward.
But Charlie, what do you make of the fact that earlier this week Democrats did pick up 2 seats that we weren't supposed to in New Hampshire and an assembly seat here in New York? I mean, the resistance is moving in that direction. We have the Jon Ossoff race coming up, which I think now it's already $10 million that has been pumped into there, and they're running about neck and neck. And I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I think we do need to really focus on the fact that we are talking about Montana. Yes, there are people there who are not hostile to Democrats, but it's Montana.
Absolutely, and with Ossoff, we're talking about Georgia. But those are the places where Democrats are going to have to make inroads into red states in order to pick up victories. And again, look at the press every day. Look at the stories that are being reported. I mean, the hostility towards Donald Trump and Republicans right now. It's just I've never seen it in my lifetime of covering politics.
So true.
It is insane. And the fact that they can't, Democrats are going to have to translate this into victories in places like Georgia and Montana. And with this much wind at their backs, if they can't, I think that spells a real problem for them.
So, Jessica, he's saying basically you guys should be operating at an advantage, given the climate, the environment,
the approval ratings of the Trump administration.
The mainstream media is operating like a super PAC against President Trump. I mean, seriously. So you guys should be up all day and night in Vegas winning with odds. But so what's going on with your party?
Oh my God. Well, we have to go midnight to 1 a.m. actually if we're going to go through all of that. There's a lot to cover. But I do think that those wins from earlier this week are meaningful. We'll see what happens going forward. They're doing the Summer of Resistance that the DNC is funding. But I take Charlie's point. If we can't translate it into wins, and if we look back over the Obama years, we lost 1,000 seats while we had a remarkably popular president that people loved to listen to and certainly didn't suffer the same kind of criticisms that Donald Trump is right now. But I do believe that if Republicans man up and women up and start having their town halls again, and they get the blowback off of Trump care, Ryan care, whatever you're calling it, the travel ban we saw was struck down again here. That's going to be a major point of contention. So you have healthcare, you have that budget where there are going to be people saying, why are you putting $1.6 billion towards the wall when you're cutting my Medicaid? And that's going to be an issue for GOP senators who took that Medicaid expansion and have constituents to protect. So I don't think all hope is lost here.
Tax reform, depending on how that goes as well. Charlie, what's the best strategy here, going forward, for the Republicans, especially because they can't take any of these races for granted, that's for sure, because the Democrats are really been quite prolific in terms of the fundraising and their, get out the vote operations on the ground.
Absolutely, Kimberly, and I realize I'm kind of a lone voice on this, and a lot of Republicans don't like it when I say this, but I do believe it. I think one of their best strategies is, first of all, they have to get tax reform. They have to have a victory, an electoral victory on that. And the second thing is, if the Republican plan to replace Obamacare fails, I don't think that's all bad, because next year, if we go into the elections with Obamacare still in place, collapsing, and you have a very good messenger like Donald Trump, and if Republicans follow suit, and simply make the case that, look, this is a plan that Democrats gave you. It is a disaster. It failed. And when we tried to fix it, not a single one of them lifted a finger to help us try to fix it. I think that gives Republicans a tremendous advantage on an issue that is usually a winner for Democrats.
But what about the fact that the popularity of Obamacare continues to keep climbing as this conversation about the Republican plan intensifies? So the more details Americans get about what the Republicans are offering, the more they like Obamacare. I agree, Democrats need to help out here, purchase insurance across state lines, small things that we can do to increase competition and drive down prices.
No, but
Obamacare is going to fail, Charlie. I mean, it's not going to.
Well, Donald Trump better not let it happen, because his voters depend on it.
Yeah, but Jessica, you make a crucial point there.
Thank you.
The more people talk about the Republican plan, the Republican plan was terrible. It was it was like a half of Obamacare. It was
all
awful.
the bad stuff of Obamacare.
Nobody in their right mind would defend that thing. And so, of course, when you start talking about that, yes, it does make Obamacare look more popular. That's why, if it fails, I think it's a tremendous plus for Republicans.
All right, they have to have competition across state lines. Free market must step in. Coming up, the early results show it's neck and neck in the Montana special election. Alicia Acuna is here next with an update on that race. Plus, President Trump meets with NATO members and tells them it's time to start paying their fair share.